The world is one. Wouldn't that be something? And that's what we're striving for. And I believe that we in unity are really contributing to that unity. And I just saw this week that, because I was going to say that at the beginning I said that we draw from all paths to spirit, and we do. But when it began, it was really basically Christian, but it still is, from the general Christian model, because Myrtle Fillmore, who was the founder, was very spiritual. She was Methodist. And the events of this week of the Methodist, a lot of Methodist churches leaving the First United Methodist Church, I think Myrtle would have been part of that group, because they were trying to bring in a lot more people, a lot more inclusivity with the LGBTQ community and all these other things that they just do not agree with anymore, with that old view, because it is an old view of who we are and what we are and who we want to try to be, just brothers and sisters. Anyway, I wanted to say that because last week, one more thing, because when I first came to, I was a Catholic. When I first came to Unity, one of the things that I really realized that I was very glad to see that I was able to reconcile my Christian upbringing with my insistence on universality, on this all-inclusiveness. And I keep saying it over and over, it's got to be about everybody. It has to be. Otherwise, whatever you're telling me, something is lacking. So this time of the year we take from the Christian model, but we see it differently. And I'm going to talk about that today, because last week we started began something very special in the Christian calendar, the Advent season. And I wanted to review a little bit of last week because, as I said, there are a lot of new people here, both who are new to Unity and who are new to the spiritual center. And I want to make sure that the fundamentals are laid out pretty well so we kind of are all on the same page. So Advent represents the 4 weeks before Christmas. We all know that. And each week, we focus on one spiritual attribute that facilitates the upcoming transformation, because that's what's happening. There's an upcoming transformation taking place. And week 1 is faith and love. Week 2 is peace. That's this week. Next week will be love, and the 4th week will be joy. Now, most of us are very familiar with that, but maybe not so much with Unity's interpretation, as I said, which is very different, and I will be focusing on that during this time. The celebration of Advent began in the 5th century. Thus, it is not biblical. It's not in the Bible. It's something that men made up. And the word Advent comes from the Latin adventus, and that means a coming expectation of some sort. And someone perhaps not familiar with the Advent might say, well, like the coming of what? What are we talking about here? Well, for a tradition, it is about the coming of the Messiah, the Savior of the world, coming into this world. Now, the implication is clear, because here before Jesus' birth, then, there was not God in the world. It had been, if you know the story, then from the fall, then the evil forces took over the universe, and they have been in charge since. And now with this beginning, it was going to start the transformation of all that. That's the traditional theology. And the ultimate, of course, is to establish the kingdom of heaven on earth and all of that. So that second part begins in Easter. So the two pillars of Christianity really are Christmas and Easter. And we'll get to that during Easter. The difference between Unity's view of this and all Christian events is that it lies in that fundamental belief, as I said, in that oneness. Everything comes back to that oneness. And traditional view is of separation. We are separate from God. Because God is everywhere present, Unity does not subscribe to the traditional view that the world has ever been devoid of God's presence. Such a thing is not possible. God is everywhere. That being so, then the Advent season, we say, well, then the significance cannot be about God coming into the world. What could the spiritual significance therefore be? And as we say in Unity, we have what we call a metaphysical interpretation of the Bible, just to be clear. And what that means is that every event, every person, everything in the entire book books, collection of books, as you know, they're a collection of books, represents our eternal spiritual journey, all the way from the Adam consciousness, all the way to the the birth of the Christ consciousness. And that's the transformation that's taking place. The difference is that we see that symbolically. It's a spiritual book. It's not a historical. That much we know. Historically, it's not correct. And it's okay, it doesn't matter. It's a spiritual book. So the underlying true message is about our spiritual journey. And what that does to Advent means that the significance is that it is that time in our unfolding awareness where we're starting to wake up. We're starting to see, as we say in Unity, that we are spiritual beings having a human experience. And that's a process. And the first step is, hope and faith that we talked about last week. We have this hope. We just have this thing inside that says, there's got to be something going on. There just has to be. And then we start finding out about it, and then a certain peace starts to overcome us. And then a joy, and then love. And so all these things come together. So last week was faith and hope. And just real quickly, we were told that faith has 3 phases. The first is hope, and it's not about expectation. It is about potential. And we talk about that all the time, potential. And from hope, we move to blind faith, which is essentially faith, which is spiritually immature and then thus subject to error. And then we continue to unfold spiritually until we get what we call understanding faith, where we understand principles, and there's a certain amount of knowledge involved there. And that brings us into week 2, peace. And the revealing word is our little metaphysical little dictionary. And we need to get some of those, Liz, by the way, on the bookstore. and in there, the definition of peace says, harmony and tranquility derived from the awareness of the Christ, that is divine, consciousness. So what comes to your mind when you think about peace? Probably a whole lot of things, especially during this time of the year. I mean, world peace is certainly a big one. It's had to be for all of us. Well, maybe not all of us, but many of us, and more of us. That's the good news. And in our introduction, we say, we envision a spiritually transformed, peaceful world. And in fact, that is the crux of the conversation when we're talking about Advent or Christmas or spirituality, period, is that awakening of us, of our spiritual nature to the presence of who we truly are as spiritual beings. And that intuitive unfolding brings about this peace and this joy and this love. It's like a river of energy that's flowing, pushing us towards higher and higher levels of consciousness. And it's no wonder that river of life metaphor appears in so much spiritual literature. And Advent describes the process by which we do this. And last week, as I said, it was faith. And I talked about my difficulty with faith growing up. Because, again, I told you my story. I was 7 years old. I'm taking communion, and I'm in class to take my first communion. And the nurse, the nuns, because back then it was nuns, they told me, well, God is all powerful and God knows everything, da, 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 da. And I'm a 7-year-old little kid, and I'm going, I'm cool with all this stuff. I have no problem with it all. And then she says, okay, so next week, we're going to go do confession. And I went like, confession? What for? And I said, I told her, come here, Miss Nun, please. I said, I have a question for you. What is it? But didn't you say that God knows everything? Well, sure, God knows everything. And is this a 7-year-old child? Said, but if God knows everything, why am I confessing to a priest who is, after all, just a man? This is a 7-year-old child. And she looks at me and says, because. Because? That's all you got? I said, oh, no. So now I understand that I was being fed something, which we just talked about, blind faith, that they believe in blind faith, that didn't fit my consciousness. So I couldn't accept this. It doesn't make any sense to me. So I finally came around to understanding faith. And that's based on our current consciousness. And I would say the same thing probably is because of you guys. And I shared a quote that I really like about faith that I found in that book from Joan Borisenko. And I'm going to share it again because it is so cool. She says, and she's a PhD psychologist, and she's got that book called 52 Strategies for a Peaceful Inner Peace or something like that. It's a wonderful little book, little tidbits of things that help you do stuff. And in the end, it says, keeping the faith. And she says, in the end, faith is less about a set of beliefs than the willingness to surrender to a mysterious force of love and guidance that helps you find your way. I said, well, there you go. I can definitely go along with that. And that kind of surrender brings you peace of mind. That knowing that really it's going to all work out. It just will, because of that guiding impetus that moves everything. And that doesn't mean that we stop searching and asking. It just kind of means that we start to trust the outcome a little bit more, perhaps. And I'm truly an example of this. But the fact that I'm here in Georgetown, to me, that was total guidance. I didn't expect it. It just came up. I saw the ad, and I said, let me put in for that. Why not? and then everything just fell into place. We were having trouble getting housing, because you know that housing around here is pretty nuts. and then that fell into place. And everything has just fallen into place. Now we've got this Let's Get Metaphysical group, and we are just having, oh my goodness, some fun with that. If you're a thinker, an asker, a question asker, oh, you will like Let's Get Metaphysical, because we see videos about all kinds of challenging things. AI. This week we talked about process theology, which nobody knows. Anybody know what process theology is? No. We talked about that a little bit. And so me coming to Georgetown was kind of like spiritsmatch.com, kind of. So it was kind of a match.com. And Liz, me and Liz hit it off immediately.
At least it worked for something.
So I brought up inner peace. So let's talk about inner peace for a moment. And that's the peace that we all seek. And I want to remind you of something about inner peace. It is the same as all other gifts, spiritual gifts that we have. We don't need to seek it. We have it. It is your Father's good pleasure to give you the kingdom. That means that you have access to everything. That is an astounding idea, that you have access to everything. And why? Because you're a copy of the whole deal. You're a fractal. You know what fractals are? You're a fractal. That's what made in the image and likeness of God means, that we are all that. And that's a big part of what we take into this Advent season. So just open up, like guidance, open yourself up to that inner peace, and it'll appear just like that. But the thing is, it can disappear quite quickly too, because things happen. I think you talked, Penny, about the person in the car, or whoever said driving. I said, yeah, that's a real challenge. I'm driving to Dallas this afternoon to go see the football game. Yay, Cowboys! And I'm sure I might get one or two like, God bless you. But
Give it a good old Southern, bless your heart.
Yeah, it's a challenge, but that's why it's a spiritual practice, because we have to practice these things. It should come naturally, but we're so steered in the direction of being a human. And we say it all the time. I'm only human, right? Say it all the time. I'm here to tell you that, no, you're not only human. You are a spiritual being, an infinite, eternal spiritual being, and you're having a human experience. Why? Because you chose to. You came here. And when I told you didn't read the contract, but it says there's going to be a lot of little bumps on the road along the way. And you said, it's okay, I still want to do it. I said, okay, well then get in there. So that's important, that it's not something that can be taken away from us. It's something that we give away, inner peace. So just keep that in mind. He made me mad. Oh, no. Not really. There might have been a little trigger for something or other, but it wasn't them. You still have control, the power of choice. So we, in Unity, we say that everything works from the inside out, from the consciousness to the outside. And during this week, I woke up and I had this, what I thought was a wonderful thought. I shared it with a group on Wednesday, and I told my wife, and it was this, about manifesting, that it starts from the inside and goes to the outside. I came up with this. I said, our life is a song the soul is singing. Our life is the song our soul is singing. And I told my wife, I was all excited. She goes like, oh, I've heard that before. What? I haven't. I thought this came, I guess I'm not that clever. So I said, well, all right, that's fine. Anyway, and I also mentioned last week that there's so many biblical passages that represent Unity's point of view. But to me, again, another quote from the Bible, for those who have ears to hear and eyes to see, it says. And like I said last week, obviously we all do. What it's really, and this is an example of a spiritual interpretation of the Bible. It's not talking about ears and eyes. It's talking about your consciousness. Are you conscious enough to understand these things? That's what it really says. So the inner world creates the outer world. And once again, we say, well, how does that work with inner peace and dealing with circumstances and things that happen to us? And once again, Scripture provides us with a really excellent example, which I'd like to share. And remember one thing, from this metaphysical interpretation of the Bible view, every time Jesus speaks, that is representative of our divine essence speaking, all right? So the story comes from Luke 8:22-25, and it's called Jesus Calms the Storm. And one day it says, one day Jesus said to his disciples, let us go over to the other side of the lake. So they got up into the boat and they set out, and he fell asleep, and a squall came down on the lake, so that the boat was being swamped and they were in great danger. The disciples woke him and said, Master, Master, we're going to drown. He got up, rebuked the wind, and calmed the sea. And he said to them, O ye of little faith. You know, he's trying to tell us, again, Unity sees Jesus as the great example, not the great exception. Because if he's the great exception, then we're dealing with a model of the universe that's separate, wherein everything is separate. But if he is the great example, then he said it, the works I do, you shall do. So now we're dealing with a model of the universe into where we are all one. And we all have the same capacity. All of us. That's why he said, oh, you have little faith. You don't understand. You can do this too. And Peter walked on the water, remember that? He actually did. I've never walked on water. I'm working on it, but I haven't gotten there yet. It's one of my goals to levitate. I told you before, because I do a lot of levitating in my dreams. I just rise up, and people look at, how do you do that? I said, just do it. I don't know how do you walk? You just walk. You just do it. I don't know how you do it. So I'm working on that. And so, and then it continues. It says, in fear and amazement, they called one another. They asked one another, who is this? He commands even the winds and the water, and they obey him. Now, this is an example of inner peace controlling an outer circumstance. That's the spiritual significance of that story. And an outer circumstance doesn't have to be a storm. It can be a divorce. It can be losing your job. It can be a health condition of some sort. It can be all these things. It's symbolic. The storm is symbolic of things that happen outside. And Jesus represents that inner peace that can overcome the circumstance. That's what the story's about. So, I want to take a little time now to turn our attention inwardly and contemplate the words and the ideas of today's message. As spiritual beings having a human experience, we continue to unfold within the manifest world. This time of Advent serves to remind us of our expanding consciousness. We move from hopeful expectation to faith and on to inner peace of our greater reality. We express gratitude for being part of this most wonderful spiritual community. This Advent season, my prayer is that we dedicate ourselves to being the peace we wish to see in both the inner and the outer world. As such, I am in peace with my home, with my family, with my friends, and everyone I come into contact with every day. Peace is a gift I accept as I open up myself to it. As I receive this Advent gift of peace, we hold it in our heart for our own healing and from the reservoir within that overflows. We share this peace with each other and with the entire world. Let there be peace, and let it begin with me. And so it is.